Hi, welcome back to the Roland Theater and to the Center Film Festival. We are very happy to be a part of this wonderful festival again, and we're very, very grateful to be one of the nonprofits receiving a portion of the ticket proceeds. That is really going to help us. We are in the middle of a seating project. The theater is going to turn 104 years old in 2021. The seating is decades and decades old and it has really needed to be replaced. So these funds will help us. These funds will also help us survive COVID. We're struggling. We're hoping to get to our seating project, and every little bit helps. We're really looking forward to a great weekend of films, and we know you are too. And hopefully in the future, we can actually all be together at the Roland Theater. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. This is Curt Chandler at the Center Film Festival, and I'm joined by the two directors and an actor, actor subject from the Streetheart block of films that we've shown today. On my left, I think you're right, is Elegance Bratton from New York City, who one of the themes today is homelessness and what happens to homeless people. Elegance spent nearly a decade on the streets before becoming a Marine and learning how to be a filmmaker, and has made, I believe, three films that are showing this weekend at the Center Film Festival. Darren I've known for a long time. We've coached together with the National Press Photographers Association. I am not in his league. He is a 3-time TV Photographer of the Year who now has a boutique video production company in Baltimore called Early Light Media. He works there with Dave Larson, who may or may not be showing up here later on. And then our third guest today is Dr. Richard A. White, who is the focus of the current Early Light Media documentary. And what I wanted to do is just start off a little bit about and talk with everybody about finding the story, because sort of a common denominator between these is there's this homeless world that we drive by all the time, and we see people from our cars, and it's sort of them and they're there, and we don't think of them really as, it's easy to not think of them as just being, fellow members of the human race. It's just somebody we're driving by. And these two films certainly show how that's not true. And so I wanted to, let me start with you, Elegance, and just tell us a little bit about how why you decided to do, first of all, if you could just summarize, like in a line or two for people who haven't seen the film yet, what it's about, and then tell us a little bit about how you decided to do this and where and why. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Center Film Festival, and so great to meet the other filmmakers. And thanks for watching, those at home. Peer Kids is about 3 homeless queer and trans youth, Casper, Deshawn, and Crystal, who I followed for 5 years as they used Christopher Street in the West Village as a place to find chosen family. Christopher Street is an iconic location. It is where the gay rights movement started with the Stonewall riots of 1969, and it continues to be a place where queer people of color can find their voice. So I came to Peer Kids. Hold on one second. Hey guys, can you be a little quieter? Thank you. But yeah, so I came to Peer Kids by way of a happy accident. I spent 10 years of my life homeless from the ages of 16 to about 25. And then, because my mother kicked me out for being gay, and that day when I was 16, I followed 3 Black gay men to the train station, and they took me following them. And I understood that they were Black gay men because of how they were like acting in public. They were being like really, 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 really gay. So they led me to Christopher Street. And when I got to Christopher Street, I discovered a whole community of people who were Black like me, queer like me. And it was really great because they seemed to understand. They were eager to have me there, and they seemed to understand without me saying a word what I was going through. Fast forward 10 years, I'm in a homeless shelter, and I'm, begging to come back. And my mother tells me, well, you can't come here if you're still gay, so you might as well join the military. And I joined. The next morning, I signed up, and I ended up becoming a combat filmmaker for the Marines. And, you know, I finished that, went to Columbia University. And when I was at Columbia, I was given an assignment in a class to show like the living, working social networks. And I knew that Christopher Street was that for me. It was a place where I could go and meet people and network and get, you know, resources that I needed for survival. And even more so, as this was a summer class, so I watched a semester in my first semester of college in my early 30s, and I saw all of these like kids going back home and how big a deal it was, like how their parents would show up and like stuffed animals. It was like a ticker tape parade almost. So simultaneously, I'm doing this project for school, and I'm thinking really, really hard about home, what home is. And somewhere in the middle, I kind of looked up and I was on Christopher Street, and I realized that this is the place where I feel most at home, because this is the place where I'm most easily understood. And I became really, really motivated to talk to people who may be peer kids themselves, who may need this space to find themselves and find family. And over time, those interviews became the movie that you guys have been so gracious to program.
And we have joining us now is also Dave Larson from Early Light Media. Hello, Dave. And thanks, Elegance. I mean, it's interesting to see sort of, you know, how you think of the story and think about what you want to do with it. Darren and Dave, if you could tell us a little bit about how you found your story.
Sure. Elegance, that sounds like a beautiful film, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm looking forward to watching it. So, well, Dave and I were set out to make a totally different film. Our goal was to make a film about the lack of arts education in the United States. And we learned about a study coming from Michigan University that showed that some of the most highly successful scientists didn't only focus, Nobel Prize winning scientists didn't primarily only study science. They also had some level of arts in their background. And the study showed that the arts provide an almost cross training for the brain. And, you know, when we think of STEM education, really it should be STEAM education and include the arts, because it's so important. So we've learned about the Baltimore School for the Arts, and we wanted to tell that story. We met the director there, Chris Ford, and we were looking for students whose lives had changed because of the arts as part of this feature film. And he said, you need to talk to Richard White. And Richard's story, you know, Dave and I had a phone call with Richard and immediately just fell in love with him and his story and what he's all about and his positivity. And once we learned about him, and I guess I can tell you too, the stories about Richard's life, and he essentially experienced homelessness as a young child, and then went on to become, and he could tell you this probably better, but one of the best tubists in the entire, I mean, one of the most exclusive, well, how did you describe yourself, Richard? He's all over the world.
I'm still trying to remember the fingerings.
Yeah. Well, Richard's one of the most accomplished tubists in the entire world, so I'll just put it that way. So long story short is we met Richard and we just said, let's just tell Richard's story. And we ended up spending about 4 to 6 months with him in Arizona and him in Baltimore and his family and teachers, and really just kind of let the story take us to where it wanted to go. And, you know, that's essentially how we ended up here.
Elegance, when you were doing your piece, you know, I mean, structurally, these films are very different. Your piece, we start out on Christopher Street, and there's all these people, and we're sort of people are going by us, and you're getting some sense of what their lives are like and sort of common characteristics they have. And eventually, your three characters emerge from this crowd, and we invest in them and what they're doing to get food and what they're doing to get housing and what their relationships are with their parents. And can you talk to me a little bit about the process of deciding who the characters were going to be that you were going to follow?
Sure. Well, initially, I surveyed, I began talking to pretty much anyone who would sit down with me. So I created a database of about maybe 100 different interview people. Participants is what we call them. I don't call the people in my film subjects, call them participants, because without them, there'd be no movie. So I'm very grateful for their participation. So yeah, how did I decide out of that group? I really feel like the lead characters of this film chose me and made themselves known. Crystal, for instance, she saw me going around conducting interviews with everyone on the pier, and a lot of the people I was talking to were her gay children. So, you know, and this is the pier, this is a party space. So it's late and people are drinking, sometimes smoking, and amongst other things. So she's like, who is this guy talking to my child who's partying? And is my child even in a state to talk to someone like this? So she sat me down and began talking to me and challenging me about what I was doing in this space. And then after about a month of working together, because I come from this military background, so it's very, you know, didactic the way films are made in the military. There's not a lot of nuance. And Crystal got tired of that process, and she turned to me one day and she's like, listen, if you want to tell my story, then you have to be my friend. The camera has to be my friend. You have to be on my side when things go bad. If I'm in danger, you care for me. If I'm hungry, you make sure I eat. And that was really profound. It changed the way that I was making the film and made it into a first-person point of view type of film. And each one of these characters represents a thing that had been threatened about me or a consequence that I faced when I was in the streets myself that I think speaks toward the universal experience of queer homeless youth. You know, of America's 2 million homeless, 40% of them are queer youth of color. And so very much this idea of what Stonewall started as, you know, a riot instigated by 2 homeless trans women of color, Sylvia Vera and Marsha P. Johnson, in 1969, there's a continuity to this epidemic of homelessness that exists to this very day. So when Crystal says, you know, I need you to be my friend, and that kind of shows me how I need to approach each one of these individuals as, you know, the camera is a peer kid. The camera needs someone like Deshaun to show him the ropes. The camera also needs to show someone like Casper's example of like a tragic ending so that we can see like and then the camera needs to be with Crystal as she transforms into herself, because no matter what, all of the folks I interview are in the process of growing up, that final stage from like childhood to adulthood, you know? So I wanted to kind of give each one of these characters the air to represent my own, the things that people assumed about my process of coming out, but also to project what the future can be, that you can find family, you can find love, you can find the support that you need. So that's how I decided I wanted to align the story with those, like, basically to place the audience in the skin of oppression, to make them feel like they're a peer kid. And you'll need people like Crystal, Casper, and Deshaun to get you through.
It takes a tremendous leap of faith, I think, for somebody like one of the peer kids to trust you to tell their story. And I think that whether it's a story like you're in the middle of that party scene and somebody's trying to document that, or whether it's a story about somebody who has transformed his life. And I wanted to ask Dr. White if you could talk a little bit about what it was like to have these 2 guys that you don't know call you up and say, hey, we want to do a film about you.
Well, the trust was instant. I trust these 2 gentlemen, and to their credit, they're both extraordinary artists. What I noticed in the process, we went from peak storytelling to optimal storytelling. Throughout it, I felt they were very professional, always checking in. Is this how you want it told? Are we saying it right? And then it was nice to see the story grow. And I think ultimately, when we have situations such as this in the other film, what you want to do is just have a chance to tell your story so that you can make the right choices to create the right kind of change. I call it choice, chance, and change. And that's really what happened with Dave, Darren, and me. They were given a chance to tell this story. They took a chance on me, and we're creating a very positive change. And I'm not even sure we've reached optimal storytelling with this yet, because every time I think it's done, it's like quiet. I'm like, all right, we get a breather. It like skyrockets again, and everyone's interested in it. I also respected these 2 gentlemen because not only were they interested in telling my story from my point of view. They were interested in the ground level, the nuts and bolts. What's the environment? Well, let's go to the environment. We want to feel the environment. We want to see where this happened. And I think that takes an extraordinary amount of dedication. And I can't thank these two gentlemen enough. I think you'll be hearing a lot more from them in the future. Their storytelling is incredible. The artistic direction that they take and integrity they take in telling the story is second to none. And I think that's what really makes a film director great, is the integrity, is the truth being told as it really is. You don't really need the Hollywood elements that are outside of that. So I can't thank them enough. And I think that's what made me trust them, their authenticity, their integrity, and the bonus fact that they're just two extraordinary artists.
Yeah, I think that with both of these films, you're talking about sort of how the film evolved as you were going along, and I think that with both these films, you can see that. And with the Raw Tuba film, I mean, there's just these series of reveals. I mean, I think I know what the story is, and then it moves into another dimension. And then I think, oh, okay, wow, this is really cool. And then, I mean, and you guys can decide how many spoilers you want to do here. And then it goes into yet another dimension with Dr. White's relationship with his brother. And I was wondering if all three of our filmmakers could sort of address how you find a story, commit to the story, but he'll still have the flexibility to decide, wait, no, it's even better if I do this.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the old kind of adage or saying is, good storytelling kind of peels back like an onion, and that's exactly what happened with us, at least with Raw Tuba. We had a pretty good understanding of Richard's story, his past story, and what had happened, and we had spoken a lot with Richard about that. And I have a very vivid memory of, we went out and we filmed with Richard for a while, and then we came back, and as you do, you kind of start going through the footage, and we started going through Richard's interview. And now at some point, he says very, very casually, he mentions his brother Will, and Darren and I looked at each other, and I was the one that had done the interview, and I missed it in the interview. So in the process of kind of revisiting, all of a sudden we were like, he has a brother? So then that kind of, we immediately picked up the phone. I remember calling Richard like right there. I'm like, Richard, did you say you had a brother? And he was like, yeah. And then we kind of talked more about that. And pretty quickly we suddenly realized that the story was taking on kind of a new direction, and that we need to kind of explore that. So I think as a director and as a filmmaker, the big thing is we're looking for strings to pull on. We're looking for avenues and rabbits to chase to see, are they going to vet out? Are they going to be worthwhile? And while we know portions of the story, we certainly don't. And so part of the fun, what I love most about documentary filmmaking is we don't know everything. And there are so many magical surprises that can happen through the process. And so, rather than kind of fight it and try to stick to the plan, the best thing you can do is just kind of chase those and see where they develop and see how it unravels. And so Raw Tuba and Richard and Will's story is very, very much was that for us as well. So.
And I just wanted to touch on one quick thing too. Elegance mentioned the idea of, these are participants, they're not subjects. And I love that way of thinking about it. But I also love the idea of thinking about them as partners. Richard has been a full partner with us in telling his story. And so, we're always working on our craft, and we want to tell stories that we think are important, that the world should know about. But ultimately, we're just kind of like shepherds. I mean, his story is it's his story. And this is only 28 minutes long of his story. His story is like ongoing forever. So really, Richard put his trust in us. I think what he said is the ultimate compliment as a filmmaker, because having integrity, having that trust, I think that's the only way to make an honest film is to have a really honest relationship with the people you partner with, and to help you, help tell his story. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all about I think the filmmaker's integrity and honesty matched with participants and partners who trust you and are willing to give you access to them emotionally and physically and their space and everything else. So yeah, I mean, Richard was the ideal human being to work alongside with this, because he's just an amazing human, and I mean, obviously from his story. So,
Elegance.
Sure. Well, your movie sounds great, and congratulations, Richard, on everything that's going on. That's amazing. That's really amazing. Yeah, like for us, the story evolved. I guess the biggest issue was that the people that I was filming are transient people. So that meant that very often I would, like, even if I'd met many people that I thought would make up the core of the movie, and they would just disappear. Like even Deshaun, for instance, at one point, Deshaun would, like, he has a small part in the movie because he'd be on the street for a month and then he'd be gone for 4 months. He'd be back for a week and be gone for 6 months. And I was naively unsure of why he wasn't there until I asked Crystal one day, and she said, well, have you looked up on the police or the prison rolls and seen if he's been incarcerated? And I looked, and sure enough, there he was. I go to visit him, and he asked me to be his mentor. He says, I'm sick of going in and out of jail, and I know you were homeless, and I, you made it out, and maybe you can show, if you mentor me, I can make it out. And of course I said yes. And then, pretty soon after that, though, Deshaun comes back to me and he's like, look, Elegance, I know you made it out homeless, but, and mind you, when he said yes, when I said yes to him and we agreed that mentorship thing, I cut him out of the movie. So even in that situation, I thought, oh, okay, well, if I'm going to mentor you, you can't be in the film. So now the whole structure of my film has to change, because I've said, okay, your actual life is more important than my film. And then a few weeks later, he tells me he can't do it actually, because he's so overwhelmed by the idea of, like, the fact that, like, even though he's working on this film and even though this could be a way for him to get into college and do all those things, he just was, like, upset because everywhere on, like, Christopher Street experiences the thing that I like to call, like, temporal segregation. So what it means is that at certain times of the day, it's kind of illegal to be Black outside, essentially. Like, it's just like a gentrifying area, and gentrification is itself a code word for ethnic cleansing. So for Deshaun, Christopher Street is a very rich environment. Like, there was one pizza place on the block where you could get something to eat for under $20. That same pizza place would put gates around their tables after the sun went down so that the peer kids couldn't sit and have a meal. And Deshaun, that really impacted him. And he would walk down the street and he would just say, like, even though I have this camera, I walk by all the places that I'm not able to go in, I'm not allowed to be in. And it makes me upset. And I don't believe that until those paces are gone, that it's really possible for me to have an opportunity. So then, some things happened that changed my production again. So it was a real, winding and unwinding, kind of undulating process to find where the story was in this film. And the transients really contributed to that.
I know that for me, investing in those different characters, there were just things that you couldn't make up. I mean, the suddenness with which Casper disappears and why is shocking. And at the same time, seeing the relationship within Crystal's family. I mean, clearly these people love each other, but you're just hitting you're hitting a barrier where, they just won't go past that point. I think that for both of these films, it looks like it was done with a very lean crew. As Peer Kids, it looks like it was you or maybe you and one other person. Can you talk a little bit about doing that, and then deciding whether to crew up or crew down for a particular scene?
Well, for us, it was like, essentially, like I said, it's a gentrifying area. So that means that police are now kind of foot soldiers into ensuring that property value goes up. And the easiest way to do that is to eliminate those from public space who can't afford the property, So in terms of crew, just by virtue of being Black outside, these kids were criminalized. So I really couldn't go down there with, like, the big setup. I couldn't have, like, I mean, on one end, I didn't really know all of what I needed when I made the film, the way I know it now. But on a totally different end, it was like even the things that I did know, I couldn't bring like huge lights. I couldn't bring like big boom mics. I didn't want to draw attention to people in a way that would make the cops target them even more. So that definitely affected how the crew went. And then, you know, I'm also making a movie about homeless LGBT youth of color, like Black kids. And I'm not making, I love Paris is Burning and I love Pose, but this is not that, you know, that is not this. This is not a movie where we watch them kind of sing and dance their way through their problems. This is a movie where we kind of really, really engage in a politics of agency, and we revel in the choices that these characters make. And those choices are celebrated, even if the outcome of those choices are not necessarily universally aspirational. So with that in mind, you know, it just became a real exercise in like discipline and a certain level of humility for me to have to accept the fact that, like, you know, the movie is a peer kid, and I have to make the film within the fabric of the limitations that impact this community, so that way the movie itself can communicate that feeling of being in that vice.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about audience. And you know, I know that for Early Light Media, you have several audiences. I mean, you're doing this in part to show clients that they should be able to trust you to think out of the box and to do things that they don't expect. And so for you, production quality is super important because you're using this as a marketing tool as well as a device to tell a story to a broader audience. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you go through the decision-making process of you know, diving into the story and doing the story as best you can, but still making it a piece that you can show clients as a tool?
Yeah, well, I would slightly tweak what you said. I think that Dave and I started Early Light Media as a vessel to tell stories like this, and as a byproduct of that, we realized that helped us with clients and you know, Early Light Media is ultimately, it's a production company, and you know, the way that we are putting food on the table with our kids is by doing commercial work and by doing stuff like that. But ultimately, we started the company to tell stories like Richard's. So in a way, the clients sort of bankroll our ability to do this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think this was also a little bit different. I think Dave could speak to this too. We normally, I think, go the way of elegance, where we usually keep it very simple and verite, and you know, it's us and a camera. We did choose to create a higher production value on this, and probably for a couple of reasons. One being that being a production company where we work on commercial film, we've accrued a lot of connections in the film business who helped us out on this. Some people just wanted to help us tell a great story, and knew Richard's story was great. And then we've also accrued some equipment that's helped us to increase the production value. But it was also because we wanted to try something a little different. For instance, there's a little bit of we've never done recreation in documentary ever, but we did a little bit on this, and I think that was partly because we didn't have necessarily a great modern day thing to follow. A lot of the film is Richard talking about what happened to him, and there isn't a storyline that we were actively following, except for Will joining him in the studio later. And so we wanted to figure out, how do we make this pop a little bit more, being kind of a retroactive story versus an active story. So that went into it too. I don't know, Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. You know, I don't think we made decisions visually or creatively on this at all in terms of thinking, oh, well, this would be great for marketing, or this would be great for the business side. I mean, we always hope that it works out that way in some regard, but at the end of it, it's just what's best for the story and what's best for how best are we going to tell this. And so there was a little bit of opportunity. Like Darren said, we had some folks who helped us out on this, who came forward and said, hey, look, like, what if we did something like this and it felt right? And then in terms of gear, like the gear that we brought along, and then as he said, with some of those more recreation scenes, there was an opportunity to kind of flex a little bit and craft a look around it that felt natural while still being able to get across the sentiment that we're going for. So yeah, I mean, the choices we made though along the way were 100% just, what is best for the story. And if at any point it felt like we were doing this artificially, we would not have done it. It truly was just, here's how we tell the story best, and these are the tools that we think will help get it done.
Dr. White, I have a question for you, spinning off that. What was it like to go into the studio with your brother, which is an experience you haven't had before, and it's real and it's important, and having these guys hanging out with you, and also sort of as a follow-up to that, what's it like seeing somebody cast as being Richard A. White child? I think you're muted.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. The experience in the studio was crazy. I think Dave called me up and he said, "Hey man, we got 8 hours booked in the studio. We're gonna make the soundtrack." And I was like, "That's a bit long, don't you think? 8 hours? Let me see what kind of music I got." And he said, "No, we just gonna show up and we gonna make it happen. We gonna what?" "Oh, okay, I'm on the way." And so we get there, my brother and the producer is like, "Man, I need a wiggy wiggy what and a boom, ba boom." I was like, "A what?" I was like, "You realize I'm a classically trained musician, right?" And then he's like, "Yeah, man, I need some Tribe Called Quest and like Stravinsky." I'm like, "What?" So, and I said, "Can you sing it?" And so they had an awesome producer. He was able to verbally describe the sounds that he was looking for. And I guess my training all those years in school paid off because I was able to process it. I was like, "You mean like this?" He's like, "Yeah, that's it. And so we're all vibing. It was the most, to this day, organic music experience I've had. So I lay down a tuba track and do exactly what the producer said with beatboxing and all this. And then the drummer's like, "Hey man, that's cool. Let me put a little something in there." And the trumpet player's like, "Oh, this would go nice on top of that." And I'm like, "This is surreal."
And then my brother came in.
Yeah, and then my brother's in the background like, "Yeah, y'all go ahead, man. I'm cool, man. I'll do it the first time, just real chill." And then like one of the best freestyle vocalists I know, he does something just extraordinary. And we're watching this real time, blown away. And I was like, "Man, this is changing the way I teach. This is going to change the way I view music." Not only was the content there musically, in terms of the lines, the vocal message that he was sending, it was Baltimore. It was real. It was unbelievable. In terms of having a child play me, that was really cool. I put this on the producers. They felt that the story needed to be told a certain way, and that element was important because most of what happened to me at homeless happened during those early years, and I credit them. I didn't know the present and the past can exist at the same time, but they really proved me wrong in terms of me telling my story in the present day and them reflecting back and really making it happen. I don't think we could have had a better character with Little King. And on set, it was amazing. So I'm seeing this little kid just following instructions, running around barefoot, much like I was on the streets. And so he's drinking this Red Bull. And I'm like, "Well, that looked cool. Let me have some of that." Man, I think I was up for the next month. So I thought that relationship was great. The family embraced us, and I couldn't be happier with their decision to do it that way.
So for both you and Elegance, since homelessness has been part of your life, and your lives are so much a part of both of these films, can you talk a little bit about your experience being homeless and what you wanted people to know about that as you were going through the process of working on these films?
Well, for me, I didn't know any better. Like, I didn't know you're supposed to have a bed. I didn't know you're supposed to eat 3 times a day, man. When I got to my foster house, I was sticking bologna sandwiches in my pocket, man. And they were like, no, you can have that. I'm like, yeah, right. You know, I knew that things weren't right, but every day was simply about surviving for me. So the idea of what I had and what I didn't have, it was insignificant. And not that it came second, but if it wasn't about surviving, it was about being attached or finding my mom. So from a storytelling and being homeless, what I want most is for people to recognize homeless people. We're humans. And it's astonishing how much we look the other way and don't view it. And the film directors will tell you, my biggest goal for this film is for every kid, every person in the world to see it and to know that they matter, that it is possible for them to do the impossible. And more importantly, I want them to know that that they belong. And I think that's the message that this film sends out the most, that the impossible is possible. It leads to impossible. And just like the film director here today, we are possible. And we're examples of what happens when you pay attention and you don't give up.
Yeah, and we certainly witness impossible several times in that film. It's just magical. Elegance, I'm going to ask you the same question.
That was really well said, by the way. You know, for me, I think when I got to Columbia, you know, it had been the first time I've been around the children of the influential and the powerful, you know, affluent people. And I was really, really blown away by their sense of entitlement, that they just seemed to think that good things were supposed to happen to them and everything was supposed to work out in their favor. And I quickly had to think of, for myself, what my wealth was. What was the thing that I was so certain of that if I were to share it, that it would create instant value for the person who received it. And I realized that that thing for me was my life experience. So, you know, I think the first thing I want people to understand from my homelessness is that my life has had value in every stage in which I've had to live it, whether I was a homeless or I was a Marine or where I'm at now as a film director and television producer and writer. You know, every one of those selves had value in that, because kind of bridging off what the brother was saying, you know, I've definitely been on the other side of this where people just look right through you as if you don't exist. And they assume that you have nothing to offer, and that because you have nothing to offer, that you're worthless. And I think that I want people to know that, because look at where I'm at now. I'm an Ivy League graduate. I've had television shows. I've got a movie coming out with incredible producers, 2 movies actually. And 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I was a person that people would call the cops on if I showed up asking for help. I was a person that people would rather, you know, walk around than look in the eye. Think about all the people you're dismissing every day who have the potential to offer great things to the world, if only you choose to see them, if only you choose to create space for them in the world. So, you know, if there's anything that people get out of my experience, is that, you know, if I'm able to be this, all of these things, I can have been homeless and extremely poor and still end up where I'm at today. Imagine all the people who could also be here. So we should be, when people watch Peer Kids, I want them to be incensed. I want them to be outraged at the incredible loss of potential and the tragic devaluation of Black queer life.
Well said.
Yeah, it's such an important message. And the question I have for the filmmakers is, you know, a lot is on the line. You've got a great story. It's an important message that you have. And then these moments happen in front of you, whether it's Richard and his brother in the studio or whether it's Crystal and her family. How do you keep yourself calm enough to not screw it up?
I have a lot of self-forgiveness. I can't say that, you know, what you watch in the movie is the calmest version of myself that may not have existed when I was actually filming it. You know, in that particular scene with Crystal and her mother and her family, it was, I mean, this whole movie for me was really triggering. You know, like the way that I made it is I would be at Columbia during the day, or like the first half of the week taking classes. And then at night, from Thursday through Sunday, I would be living with the peer kids, whoever I was focused on at any given point in time. And, you know, there were some times where I was out there every day for 6 months. And there were some times I'd be out there once every 6 months. It took me almost 5 years to complete shooting the movie, and then another 3 years to edit the film, with pickups kind of laced throughout those 3 years. So there's definitely different kind of like variables of the amount of time I would actually be out on the street. But, you know, filming it this way, being homeless for 4 days essentially, and then going back and forth, it's very traumatic. It's very triggering, because that's basically the pattern of my childhood, and a pattern that I'd done some really extreme things to avoid. So imagine sitting in Crystal's, you know, family living room and having a conversation, watching her have this awkward, violent, and at times dehumanizing conversation with her parent, and then thinking of myself being a little jealous because I never had the opportunity to have that conversation with my family before I was kicked out. And, you know, in many ways, this film is I don't want to say a condemnation, but it is an interrogation of the gay rights movement and the civil rights movement. Right? There's a scene in this film where Deshaun talks about how he's contemplating becoming HIV positive, because there's a program in New York City where if you're HIV positive, you get a house. Well, in reality, you have to have AIDS to get that house. Your T cells have to get to a certain point to where you have you start to get opportunistic infections, and you're likely to die of AIDS, and then you get a place to live. You know, and when you think about the civil rights movement, what was Martin Luther King fighting for? You know, he's fighting so that blacks and everyone who was not a straight white guy in America had a chance to have a place to live, some food to eat, something meaningful, education in their heads. And to think that at the end of this 50 some odd year process, or 200-year process, or 400-year process, depending on whose version of civil rights you believe, here we find Deshaun in 2013 saying that the civil rights movement is at such a sorry state of disrepair that the only way he could get the promise of the dream of Martin Luther King is to infect himself and make himself disabled. It says a lot about where our political movements are. You know, and I think in terms of the gay rights movement, I didn't have the conversation. We didn't have the tools in our household to have a conversation about me. So when it was time, when I started to be different from everybody, it was just easier to kind of push it away, because I didn't know what to say. I was a kid, and my mother didn't know what to say. And where's the gay rights movement when it comes to working class Black people, working class people of color? Nowhere to be found. So I'm at 15 years old, left to defend my whole life, and I end up on the streets. So I make Peer Kids for that reason, so that there is something there that can help people sort all of this out.
Yeah, it's so important. I'd like to talk a little bit about access. You know, there's one point, Elegance, where you're following people. They're sort of having a march down the street, and the cops are hassling them, and they're hassling you. I mean, you're just one of them at that point. And I think that, you know, my camera has been a passport to go to a lot of places and talk to a lot of people. But there's places it's going to take me a long time to fit in enough that people will stop just looking at me and going, there's a journalist standing over there. How does that work for and against you as you were working with the Peer Kids?
Well, it was really, really tough, because initially when I started making the movie, people thought that I was working for Love and Hip Hop, like Mona Scott Young. They thought that, you know, in order to get into the project, that they would have to pour drinks on each other and fight. So I was getting a lot of access, but not necessarily the kind of access that I was looking for at first, you know. And then as people started to understand what my intentions were, that I wasn't interested in even really seeing them vogue all that much. I really just wanted to spend time with them, living in the reality of their truth of being homeless queer youth. And people became some people were very open and were willing to share with me, and some people became very, very defensive, because the movie that I'm making is capturing a part of life that a lot of people, when they overcome it, they never, ever, ever want to look back. they don't, even for myself, admitting that I have gone through homelessness is at times quite awkward for me. I don't like to admit that the things that I've had to do to survive. And I don't like to talk about, times when I couldn't shower and I couldn't afford glasses and all that kind of stuff. So, access became a little bit harder to come by at times because people were like, why does he want to see me at my worst? And after a while, it opened up again because people understood that I actually see power in that. And I was making it in such a way to where, again, people assume that because you're homeless, you have no choice in anything that you do. But in reality, everybody is making decisions all day long. Even those who don't seem to have kind of like an aspirational path are making decisions. And I wanted to celebrate that fact that you are making a choice. So when people saw that I was viewing their life through a lens of empowerment, it opened up again.
For the early light media crew, Dr. White was sort of your passport into another world. And how does it work to be able to go in there and, there's probably in some neighborhoods in Baltimore, they probably don't see people who look like you unless something bad has happened. And how do you, get through that barrier to so that they understand it, that you want them to be participants, to be partners in the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, in the case of Richard, it kind of goes back to trust, So, it is all trust, and I think that inexperienced filmmakers, inexperienced journalists, and or filmmakers who are doing it for the wrong reasons are pretty transparent. And sometimes I think people use filmmaking as a way to almost be a voyeur or something. I don't know. Or they think it's like Geraldo or something, like the more extreme stuff like Capture that, or messed up stuff is going to make a good movie. I think it's what Elegance said. It's all about shooting through an aspirational lens. As a filmmaker, I think, so Dave and I, when we started Light Media, the entire purpose of the company is so when it comes to business clients, is to help them. It's really to help the companies that are changing the world through business. And so we'll do what might be brand films, even though they're not necessarily documentaries. They're like films for brands, but we make choices to work with people who allow authenticity, and we research the companies that we partner with to make sure that they're actually existing to make the world a better place. So I think that that's part of like I said earlier, we started this company to basically bankroll our ability to tell these kinds of stories. Because I think we've talked a lot about how what we do has an impact. I don't think there's anything more impactful than sitting in an audience, before COVID with 60 people and watching a 2-hour film. I don't think there's anything that moves you more. And that's why we love filmmaking. But, there's a lot of people out there that do it for the wrong reasons, and they do it for voyeuristic reasons, or they do it to get famous, or they do it, and they're all transparent, and sometimes they earn people's trust and sometimes they don't, but they don't have very long careers because ultimately they get found out. I think it's all about trust. So Dave and I both worked years ago, as you know, Curt, in journalism, and we both worked at Fox 45 in Baltimore, which is a local affiliate station where we did just local Baltimore news. And like you said, my first job there was I worked a 3 a.m. shift, and my job was to go into West Baltimore and film areas where murders just happened for the morning news. And it was bizarre because Dave and I both have different backgrounds than anyone. We have our own experience. But I think the number one thing that I've always done, no matter what, is just treat other people like anyone else. Like I remember going our assignment desk sending me to where a homicide had just happened a few hours earlier in West Baltimore, and there was a group of kids, and this was through like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. The cops had left, and at that point, people were just kind of grouped around, and and this is a very troubled area in the sense that somebody in their community was just murdered, right? So there's a lot of emotions flying around, but and people asked me what I was doing there, and this is one of 300 times that I would go out and film this, and I just talk to people. I think if you there's a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you like, your biases show up when you're scared, right? Like, your biases show up when like you're not sure if you should be there because you're white. And I feel like if you just go into it and talk to people, and I don't know. I mean, it's hard. I know that I've gone through things where I've asked myself if I'm the right person to tell Richard's story, and I know that Dave and I have talked about this because I'm white, right? But ultimately, it's not necessarily a black and white story. It's a story of a really amazing kid who grew up to become a really amazing adult. So I'm kind of going all over the road here, but it's complicated, and it's not easy. I mean, being a filmmaker, like Elegance was talking about, being triggered, and I feel like one thing that's not talked about enough is, like, we see things that we're at people's worst moments. We're there, in the journalism world, especially, Curt, where we came from. Like, I stepped in a pool of blood accidentally on a shoot one time from a murder, and but not just that. We filmed all over, so it's traumatizing, it's triggering, it's painful, no matter what your experience is and what color your skin is. I think at the end of the day, it's like, how do you recognize your biases? How do you work on them? How do you just show up and try to have conversations with people and learn about people? I don't know.
No, I think the thing that these film directors in the room have in common is excellence. And we have to realize that excellence is void of color. It's excellent or it's not. It's void of gender too. And we can't subscribe these titles when it comes to excellence. Excellence is on the level or it's not. And both these films seems to be on the level of telling a story in an excellent manner. And that's what we have to remember.
And I just want to say, I was going to push back against that a little bit. One of the things that helped me have access is the fact that I'm one of them. I lived how they lived. So there's a certain kind of trust that kind of comes with it, that of course I have to prove myself every time I go out there with that camera. Every time I go, I have to be consistent. I have to show them that the story that I'm trying to tell is one that has empowerment in it. But at the same time, there's a certain level of grace that I'm given, because people know that a decade prior, I had come up through these very streets. I'm one of their own. People were invested in my success, because if I succeed, then they succeed. And I do think that, like, art is creativity is creativity. It doesn't necessarily know color, but we live we are the results. We are the benefactors and the losers sometimes from history, right? It depends on where you fall in the line. And in documentary film, we can't deny that, like, white folks kind of have an advantage in the game of, like, depicting what is going on, like the negative impacts of racism, because one of the positive impacts of racism is white wealth and white leisure. Like, filmmaking, historically speaking, filmmaking is any of the high arts very often are leisure activities. They come about when a society has built up enough wealth to ensure that a certain class of people do not have to work so hard to keep their families afloat, to where they can diverge into these creative lanes. And who has the historical advantage to do that? So for me, one of my big things is, like, talking to people and asking, can I film you? Okay, I filmed this thing of you. Can I show it? And then when I show it and I don't get it, what does it mean? And listening to people when they say that, and adjusting what I'm doing according to what they say, so that I'm not taking advantage of my own privileges and biases. My movie centers on a Black trans woman. I'm not a Black trans woman, right? And I can't ever pretend to be one. But what I can say is, Crystal, Does this make sense to you? No, it doesn't. All right, I'm going to rethink that.
So I just want to make one comment on that, Elegance. So I think, Curt, you said something about there's a high stakes for you or something like that, telling these stories, and there is high stakes. And I would tell you that as filmmakers, when you partner with somebody, so ultimately, if you're a film director, you have technically final cut, right? I mean, you can be true to the story or not true to the story, and there are so many ways that film directors with low integrity can cut something a certain way to show it more dramatically or whatever. And I think what's important to me as a filmmaker, I think my number one fear is that I'd show this to Richard, we'd show this to Richard, and he'd say, this didn't feel right. And it's not that I'm not as concerned with him being necessarily angry with us or like angry that he was a part of it, although I wouldn't like that. It's more about, did I get this wrong? Did I get this wrong? Because ultimately, as you said, Elegance, you have experienced it, and it's a way for you to get inside the door, but you still aren't a trans woman, right? So you still have to tell a story that you aren't necessarily know the most about or have experienced yourself, right? So as filmmakers, we have to put ourselves in positions where we are telling a story that there's some level of discomfort there, just like I can tell a story of, I'm not personally Republican, but I might tell a story about a Republican. I don't have to be one to tell that story. I think it's just a matter of, do you have a sense of integrity? Do you have a sense of fairness and justice? And then we showed this to Richard, and he had questions, he had thoughts about it. We recut it a couple different times. And ultimately, I'm still fearful that we didn't get it right. But it's like, what can you do? I remember a film we did a couple of years ago called Throw was about a young man who is a professional. Well, he's a professional yo-yoer, but the story wasn't really about yo-yoing. It was about how many people in his life had experienced gang violence and violence in his life. It wasn't really about yo-yoing, but we'd sent him numerous copies of the film. He never really gave any feedback, and we'd ask him questions, and we never heard anything. Got into a premiere at Telluride in Mountain Film, and he came with us to the premiere. We were thrilled to have it. We're sitting in the audience. Our film's about to play, and I was like, "So, what did you think?" And he said, "Oh, I haven't seen it yet." And we were terrified, because what is he going to think when this thing goes on? And ultimately, it was kind of a compliment, because we felt like, okay, you must trust us so much that you're not even going to watch this. But it was also terrifying because, ultimately, if he says, that just didn't feel right, that's like the worst thing that could happen to us as filmmakers. So ultimately, he loved it. But yeah, I think making it's got to feel right. It's got to we got to tell the truth, and it can be hard and subjective and scary.
And I think having just to piggyback off what I feel like has been kind of a common theme with all of us, including, is just the amount of respect I think needed for not only the story but the characters. It's the reason, Elegance, you call them participants, and not just subjects. I mean, as filmmakers, I think access, trust, all of this comes out to having just an immense amount of respect for the story you're about to tell, for the way you're trying to tell it, and for the characters that you were trying to bring to light. And that respect ultimately, I think, is what gains you access in a way that even if you're not a part of that culture or lifestyle or whatever it is, I think that it gives you that ability to say, look, ultimately, we want to do justice for you, or we want to tell the best story for you. And so, for me, and Darren, and I don't know, we had such an amount of respect for Richard, his story, and what he was bringing to our film that even if there were opportunities where we were going to get it wrong, like we respected him enough that he was going to be able to help us get it to where he, like Darren said, where he was, he liked the film and he felt like we did it justice.
I totally want to keep this conversation going, but we have a hard out at 5:30 because I actually have to start another room. But trust me, the beers are on me for all of you guys the next time that we meet up, because I just want to keep this going. Pearl's here to tell us that it's time to leave in the nicest possible way.
I am.
I'll turn it over to her.
An invitation. First, I want to welcome all of you back to the Center Film Festival at some point. Ratuba and Elegance, it would have been great to hear about how your artistry is affected by your street heartness and experience, but maybe you can write something about that, send it to us if you'd like. We'd love to hear more about it. I hate that we have to rush out, but I think this coupling of films between me and Curt, we put it together, we were just blown away, and we're just so happy to have this conversation. And I want to welcome everyone tonight to the next talk, which is Into the Classroom. And then we have our closing night film and then our award ceremony. So hopefully we see all of you back here, right over here in the live space. Curt, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I know that Early Light Media is all over social media. I believe Elegance here on social media, and Dr. Wright, you are too as well. And I want to see the next piece of music you're on. I want to see the next films you guys make. I am so sorry that I'm going to have to say goodbye now, but it's time to go. So thank you very, very much.